can then call it whatever I like. So you can either do a mass renaming, or you could say, I want to import a list of functions, but give them all some prefix. You can also just specify a suffix as well, or both. Anonymous functions. Some of this, you were at Toby's talk, he kind of talked about why you might not want to dip into namespaces, you might not want to pollute your namespace. So exporter autoclean gives you a mechanism where you can define some symbols for export, and the only way for people to get at those symbols is through the import interface. They can't dip into your namespace because it's not in your package symbol table. So here you have to go through this interface. If you try to call spells : Gunnerstone, you'd get an error saying there is no such function. So if you just want to control the interface, and there's good reasons why you might want to do that, this is a way to do it when you're exporting, to say, you've got to talk to me through my public interface. The flip side of that is when you're importing from someone else into your namespace, you might not want that function you're importing to be part of your package symbols, because then someone else can be dipping into your namespace to get them. Or if it's an OO module, then you don't want that to be presented as a method of yours. So what you can do is import it as a my variable reference. So you can then call it that way. So it's not available to anyone else, but you can just use it within your package. So you're not polluting your namespace. I'm not sure what's happening with that. So there's a number of modules. So a lot of modules follow the basic pattern of specifying variables, the export and export OK. But there are some other ways of specifying in your package which things should be exported or available for import. So there are a number that use attributes to basically annotate your functions. So you can say this one is exported by default, and you can also give a list of tags. So this one is always exported, so it's like setting the export symbol, and this is like setting the export OK. The good bit about this is when you're looking at, if you're looking into the source code for someone's module, as you're looking at each function, you can see, yes, this is available, this isn't available. But it's quite verbose and noisy. There's a lot of distraction as well from doing that. There's several modules that provide this. This one, given the recent announcement about Perl 6, might be of interest. It basically implements the style of this tagging that's going to be apparently used in Perl 6. So you can use that approach. And this is another one that uses the same tagging. An exporter no-work started off as trying to make it absolutely simple for exporting functions, but then steadily added features, so it's not quite a no-work module anymore, but it's a more compact notation for specifying the attributes. I put this one in really because it's kind of a bizarre kind of approach, but if it appeals to you, and I guess that's part of the wonder of CPAN, is that people do things that just might not have occurred to you. So you basically have to read through the module from top to bottom, and then you have spacers using this module saying, okay, everything you saw from the last time you called me to here, either export it or don't export it, or make it available under these tags. So the downside of that compared to the attributes on the functions is that as you're going through, if you're looking at a particular function, you don't know whether this is available for export or not. You have to scan down until you find one of these controls. So fortunately, this is not widely used on CPAN. Exporter declare is try to do Exodist Chad looked at Moose and said, well, what would a Moose style exporter module look like, where it's declarative instead of setting up variables. So it has some functions, so this is just like setting the export and export OK, but you do it very in the Moose style. You can either set it all up front, or you can Similar to the tagging, you can call these functions right next to each function, so then you're annotating each function. So then as you move functions from module to module, it can carry its export status with it. And it supports tagging in a similar way. The downside of this is you can end up with a lot of this ornamentation around all your functions, specifying how you want to do tagging and how you want to do exporting. Similar to exporter tiny, you can rename things in pretty much the same notation. There's loads more features that I haven't gone into in this, and I think particularly a beginner looking at this module, it's a very daunting thing. Even though the basic usage is very simple, it makes it look incredibly complicated. So I'd hesitate to suggest another. There's already 44 exporter modules, so maybe not. There is a layer on top of that, exporter magic, exporter declare magic. So where exporter declare, you're having to set up these various structures of quoting and braces going on. This is kind of like a simplified version. The downside of this is that it pulls in an awful lot of other CPAN distributions, where if you're comparing that to just using a vanilla exporter, you have to, I think, have some pretty complex needs to go to a module like this. Hybrid modules, these are ones you can use either as a class or as a function library. I really don't like this kind of approach. There's a number of modules out there, and this makes it easier, that have this style of interface. This makes it easy to write one of those. Creating mashup modules where you basically, there's a set of modules you standardly use in your system, build them together into one module, so using that is like using all these other ones, so boilerplating. So this provides a simple interface for doing that, where you can basically just say, I want to pull in this function from this module, and this function from this module, and those that then get exported by default when someone uses yours. If you want more control, there's import base, which lets you specify a standard set of things that will be exported or used, so they may or may not be exporting functions. You can also give named optional groups as well, so that if someone says, I want to use this name group as well, then you get all these additional things as well as the default set when you use the module. Generators, also known as curry. So if sub-exporter has a number of standard features. I'm just going to skip over those for time reasons. Let's say you've got some nrand function that you can pass in a string and the length of nrand that you want to generate. Someone using your module might say, I've always wanted to generate trigrams, so I want to fix the second parameter here, n, to always be 3. So what they can do is, if the module is using sub-exporter, they can say, I want to pull in this function ngrams, I want to fix the second parameter, this n parameter, to 3, and I want to call the function trigrams, and then they get a function trigrams. So exporter tiny also has this feature. When I started doing this, I thought, I can't imagine any time someone might want to use this. But once you know about something like this and it's in your head, like mere days later, I then hit some other problem on which I thought, this is a perfect use for that, for curry. Quick summary of some of the other modules that are out there. Badger Exporter was written by Andy Wardley, who wrote the template toolkit, which, as you might guess from that, means it's got loads of features. It's really well documented, but for most people it might be a bit of a Swiss Army chainsaw approach to exporting. Sub-exporter progressive. Because sub-exporter pulls in a lot of dependencies, this is basically a layer on top of sub-exporter that says, if you're only doing simple things, I'll just fall back onto exporter. But as soon as you try and do something more complicated, I'll then pull in the sub-exporter. So it's kind of a neat way to get the best of both of these. I'll skip that one, you can read that. Exporter renaming, Monkey patches the exporter module to give you the renaming functions that you've seen in some of the other modules. Sub-exporter simple gives you a very simple layer on top of sub-exporter, but if you want a very simple interface, I'd suggest using a different module. And sub-import is on the opposite side from exporting, lets you on import use the same semantics to decide what to pull in from some other package. quickly on dependencies. So these are the distributions that have no non-core dependencies. These are the ones that have, so this is the number of distributions, non-CPAN distributions that things depend on. This is the total number of non-core modules. So you just need to be aware of these if you're using, if it's just a simple function library of functions, you maybe don't want to be doing this unless it's a really big complicated library of functions. One thing might help you on your decision is, well, which are the ones of these that are heavily used? And a pop quiz for you. Exporter, someone commented when I did the previous one of this, why is Exporter so underreported here? So something to think about. So observations, in particular the documentation for all of these modules isn't very good for, very welcoming for new users. So one of the things I'm going to be doing is submitting some pull requests. But also, a lot of the Exporter modules have a lot of advanced features for importing. But if you're using these modules, you have to document those inside your modules documentation, otherwise people don't know those features are available. And most of the advanced features tend not to actually be used with the modules that could be using them. Quick summary on what modules to use in what situations. Just about the time.
You have a couple of minutes. You're backing on to lunch anyway, so if you take some more time, it's fine.
So, in general, if it's a simple set of simple module with some functions you want to export, exporter time is a good place to start. It's got a nice simple syntax. It's similar to Exporter. It gives richer control on importing, and it only gives you one non-core dependency. And it's written by Toby, so what could go wrong? If you've got rich tag needs, Exporter Easy is a good choice. I'm going to talk to Toby. I'd really like to see that nesting of colon on the tag.
It might already work on this.
Excellent. I'll put it in the slide after I've had a play, maybe. And depending on what type of constants you want to export, there's two different approaches there. And in general, don't export variables. And if you're writing a module, stick on one style, just no or functions. It just makes the documentation more complicated if you try and support both. Okay, any questions?
Not so much question, more of a comment. On the general comment of not exporting variables, there is one module that I know of that does export a variable to great effect, and that's file chidia. In that it's not just a variable, it's a magic variable. So you can just assign into $CWD to change your current working directory, and it supports local, so that you can, in a local block, chidia, and then as soon as you leave the local block, you're back where you were. So I think that's one possible exception of not exporting variables, because that is a really useful variable that should have been a core global variable.
Yeah, I'd probably class that as the exception.
Yeah.
Rather than the...
I have a similar example. A friend of mine created a model that exports a logger variable, and if you have ever used log control, for example, you know that the logger should be usually initialized with the current package as a category. So that the logger will be set up for logging that is suitable for the current class or package and so on. So it is also useful to say, for example, use my logger, QW log, and you have a log variable that is already initialized with the configuration.
Okay, thank you. Time for lunch. Yes, so Exporter Tiny is kind of like a lightweight version of it's almost a master love child, like the sub exporter and exporter. And it gives you a nice simple interface for setting up your module like exporter. It gives you all the features of sub exporter, but without all the non-core dependencies.
That would be perfect for us. And also the use case for exporting variables, which is exporting methods really. Because per method call syntax actually use a scalar variable identifier, and they use that full
Yes, that's I just think that's a really good report. Thank you.
I've written and uploaded a module called, how do you pronounce it? Photobox? It's fake autoboxing.
Photo, yes.
Yeah.
F autobox.
With an X in there. F-A-U-X.
Yes,
yeah. And it adds, it exports variables called push, pop, keys, and so on, and you can call that on references without blessing them.
That sounds like that's kind of hovering right at the edge of kind of. Is that something you should be doing?
And recently at work, I made a very tiny internal module for debugging DBIX class stuff, because you can set an environment variable, dbic trace, to see all the SQL that's generated by the module. But if you want to see just one statement or one function, so this kind of exports a variable, which is an add-on method on a result set object, and it enables debugging just for that one thing.
Right.
And it's a variable, so I can just plug it into a bigger expression with a chain of method calls, just put it in there, and then get the debugging output for everything after it.
Cool, thank you. Really finishing your tool, writing your tool, like sort of not long before giving it is you haven't practiced the flow of it.
Yes, I absolutely. Yeah. That's
a few places where it's kind of like, what? This slide's next.
yeah. That's the thing, you don't be surprised by the slides, do you?
Yes, being surprised by your own slides.
Yeah. Yeah. Same thing happens if you do know the plot, but that you give it a year later or something, and you think, oh, I've done this stuff before, but you can't quite remember exactly how you link the slides together.
And particularly if your thinking has kind of evolved.
Exactly.
You haven't thought to evolve with the slides. You kind of, what the hell was I thinking here?
Yes. Do you know what to do on a Mac to get that working?
No. I've lost several of these dongles over the years.
I've stolen my son's computer because Macs just work apparently. Displays.
You're just testing it for later.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure.
I've only ever had good experience with the plug in and work.
Is there something you have to press to share screen? Or
No, generally,
just plug it in?
so try unplugging it and plugging it back in. Because in general, just plugging it in, it should.
There's two things you can plug into as well. Oh,
Yeah, it's like this.
okay. Right. That's fine.
That's
That's not what's on my screen.
So if you've got